Welcome to the Last Week in Denmark podcast. I'm your host, Wizzy Magnuson, and I'm here with founder of Last Week in Denmark, Narcissus, to discuss this week's news and offer you extra insight into what's been happening and how it could affect you. Now let's jump in. Welcome back to the microphone, Narcissus. So, how are you, and what's new in the world of Last Week in Denmark this week?
Well, it's been a crazy week once again, just like last week. You can really see that people are back to this mood of being back to work, back to school, lots of things happening. You can barely keep up with the news stream around. But we have to do our job, and we have to curate what's interesting for the international audience, and that's what we are doing. But what's new? It's us, right? This is our third episode already. Yay!
Yay!
and we have already quite a following build up. Of course, so far, most likely it's mainly people from the Last Week in Denmark audience. But hopefully, with time, we'll have time to also reach out. Now we are obviously focusing on creating a very good content, but with time, we will also start promoting, getting out there, and hopefully more people will see the value of this podcast. But however, to the ones who already are our first listeners, the core group, don't be afraid to let people know, let your friends know, your acquaintances, your coworkers, your family about this podcast, because our mission is quite simple. We want to empower people with information. And for us as internationals, information is as valuable as gold. So that's pretty much, I think, what's new for me. What about you? What's new in the world of radio and journalism?
Well, one of my latest episodes reached number 1 in the global business charts on Mixcloud. I was quite happy about that. That's my show, The Business Of. I also have a podcast, The Business Of. So I have a radio show, The Business Of, for Connections Radio or Connections B2B. And then I have the Wiz Media, The Business Of podcast, which is kind of similar, and it's similar content and stuff. And I'm kind of like with this, I'm kind of working on the content and refining the product before I really shout about it. So I don't even know how many downloads I've had now. But that's going well. The guests themselves are sharing it, and that's great. It's good when you see your work being shared by other people that find it meaningful and enjoy it on social media, kind of doing your marketing for you. That's really helpful. And in radio itself, Connections Radio have more listeners.
Okay.
Many more listeners than this time last year. We've had a real surge in interest. And yeah, it's all going well, ticking along nicely.
No, that's good. I mean, I really hope that at some point you might even consider doing radio here in Denmark, because after all, there is a lot of support from the culture ministry for independent radios, independent TV stations to be set up. So who knows, maybe you'll bring your radio work to Denmark, because we need more English content, audio English content here. I mean, yes, it's great, this podcast we are doing, but it's only half an hour. People might want more. It gives them more of a sense of belonging, having all sorts of shows. I mean, this is a news commentary, but imagine having a comedian show, or I don't know, there's all sorts of shows that can be created, right, for the English-speaking audience here in Denmark, which is significant, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because this is the plan. It's in the planning. I've engaged with quite a few hosts now, and they're working on producing pilot shows for what I'm not going to announce the name because I don't want anyone to nab it, but I do have a plan to create a full-blown 24-hour radio station here in Denmark. So watch this space, or listen to this space.
Nice.
And I'll tell you more about that another time.
Looking forward.
So looking back on last week, one of our announcements was about the merchandise launch. How did that go?
Well, we were positively surprised to see that people actually took a chance on us, and we had quite a few orders. Of course, it was mainly like cups and bags and a couple t-shirts, actually, which surprised me. I actually never thought that people still wear t-shirts that are somehow branded with one thing or another. But we have really cool, let's just say, designs created. It feels less like a promotional product and more like a art in the end. And it's art created by an international for internationals, and people see that. Because in the end, the purpose of this merchandise is, to let people know that Last Week in Denmark exists, but also to kind of send a message that this is the new Denmark, right? It's a Denmark that we also part of. It's a Denmark that includes people that look all sorts of ways. It's no longer one way to be Danish. There's many other ways, and that's kind of the message, and I think we are slowly getting there. Of course, as I said, it's not the cheapest platform, but we really wanted to focus on quality. We will also try to there will be all these events in September where we plan to be present. International Citizen Days, for example, 22-23 September in Copenhagen, 14th of September in Aalborg, 30th of September in Aarhus, and there you'll have also the chance to get merchandise directly from us if you want to, and also meet us, see who we are, who is the people that spend so many hours to make this project happen.
That's fantastic. And just remind us, where can we go to check out the merchandise and make purchases currently?
Well, if you just go to the latest newsletter, there's always a link there towards the web shop.
Now, moving on, Narcissus, can you please talk us through some of the newsletter headlines for this week and introduce what we'll be covering on today's episode?
Of course. I mean, if you take a quick look at this week's edition of Last Week in Denmark, we can see titles like, a ban on burning religious books in public spaces. I know we have mentioned this a lot in the last couple of weeks, but now there is finally a law proposal, which means that which will be proposed and most likely passed because it's proposed by the government, which has a majority in the parliament. So it's more or less a done deal. So people who plan from now on to burn or to do anything that's degrading to all sort of religious objects, like physical objects that have some sort of meaning to any religious order, they can either get a fine or even go up to 2 years in prison. So they got quite serious about it. They want to send a message to the Muslim countries that they are taking seriously what's happening. Like, it got a bit out of hand. There was more than 100 Quran burnings in the past couple of months. It became more of a mockery than actually freedom of speech, to be honest. And to be honest, they could have stopped this to begin with if they just have made it illegal to do arson in public. I mean, France has it so smartly done. Do not burn stuff in public, and end of story.
Difficult in Denmark, though, because we like our fireworks, don't we, on New Year's Eve?
Yeah, I know there is a tradition that we gather we can be even in the middle of the city in a square and put lots of wood together and burn all sorts of things from witches to bulls and whatnot, depending what part of Denmark you're from. But, I mean, we can make exceptions to the law. Law is not straightforward. There's always can be done exceptions. Like, for Danish traditions, we allow this special occasion where you can burn in public. But don't leave it that anyone can burn anything in public. I find that, to be honest, not very safe for the rest of us.
It's not safe, is it? It's downright dangerous.
Yeah. But anyway, enough about that. It's not something we're going to cover more today. Of course, another thing that's very interesting for us as internationals, because we do travel a lot, is that the increased border control with Sweden and Germany it's ended. It seems that after 23 days, the risk for higher risk for terrorism is not there anymore. So now the Swedish border is it's eliminated. And then with Germany, just random checks from time to time. But to be honest, I mean, if you have seen in last week's edition, you probably have seen that the European Commission is looking into the legality of this. They had this temporary border with Germany for so many years now. And it feels now that they are just dragging their feet with it. And most likely we are not going to... It's on its way out. They have no legal reason to be able to keep it for longer. So I think by the end of this year, we will no longer have even these random checks with Germany.
It's in the word temporary, isn't it? I mean, how long does something go on for and you still get to call it temporary? So this seems entirely appropriate.
Yeah, 6 years temporary. Imagine that. It's like a friend that comes over and says, I'll just stay for 2 days, 2 nights, and then I'll find something else. And then a year passes. Like, so you still haven't found anything. But anyway, let's go to the next one, which is donation of F-16 warplanes to Ukraine. Actually, this is a big thing, because Denmark actually took steps towards being like a frontline state in this war. And they are forcing other NATO states and Western countries to go towards donating warplanes to Ukraine. Ukraine has asked for warplanes for a really long time. The NATO countries have said, no, we cannot give you warplanes. It can escalate our conflict with Russia and whatnot. But now Denmark and Netherlands decided to push the other countries by being the first ones to donate such warplanes. So we're going to see that most likely the other NATO country will have to follow. Now it's no longer a question, should we not? It's more of a question, why are you not? Why are you the ones who don't give anything?
So do you think it's going to be like a domino effect that Denmark has begun?
And it's quite interesting because such domino effects have been done by others before, like for when they decided to finally give like tanks, and usually it was USA who was starting point, but now Denmark and Netherlands decided to take like a leading role in this war. So it's obviously puts us at odds with Russia. I mean, right now Denmark's relationship with Russia is at all-time bad. Like the Russian ambassador was very clear that this is not going to be forgotten by them. So let's see how that goes. Clearly that it's a gamble here, but it could also place Denmark into a very influential role on the global stage. And then we can also look at the advent of independent schools in Denmark. If you don't know what independent schools are, it's basically like alternative schools to public schooling. Because actually in Denmark, we are not forced to send our children to school. We are forced to make them learn something. Basically, the constitution says that we have a responsibility to teach our children, but not to send them to school. So if we decide to keep them home, or if we decide to create alternative schools, it's up to us to do that. And actually we can do that. Any international that wants to set up an independent school can do that, because the money follows the children. So if you convince parents to send their children to your school and not to public school, then the money will follow those children to you, and you'll have funding for it. So I think it's quite interesting, and I don't think that many internationals know about these independent schools. There's quite a few of them established. There's some of them French schools, German schools, Arabic schools, Catholic schools, Muslim schools, very special method schools. Like there's all this, education method developers that became famous on a global stage. There's the traditional independent schools made by Grundtvig, following the Grundtvig method of education.
So with these independent schools, are they regulated, and are they provided with a set curriculum that they have to follow to sort of bring the schooling up to a national standard, or can they teach them anything?
Well, it's up to the school to decide the values they want to instill the students with. So first of all, they decide the culture foundation and so on. There's obviously some bare minimum expectations from the state, so that the children, when they finish, they have certain skills, for example, in mathematics, in language. Those are expected to, but the way you do it, the method, the approach, it's up to you. How many hours and whatnot. They just want to see the result. Can you reach similar results at the end? Great, that means your method also works. So there's no like set curriculum, let's just say, that you are probably aware of it, that exists in other countries. It's quite, so that's why it gives you this freedom. But to be honest, the reason why we're talking about independent schools now is because a lot of municipalities are struggling financially. So a lot of small village schools are getting closed. So the parents in those village schools, they got this smart idea that they will just establish independent schools instead in the same building and whatnot. The difference is that the public school has to be financed by the municipality, by the local government, while the independent schools are financed by the state. And as we know, the state is doing quite well financially.
Yes, we learnt last week that they found a sort of pocket of pennies, didn't they? That they didn't know they had. So that's looking good for next year.
Yeah, just 16 billion. It is looking good. But it's so weird, right? To have local governments struggling. Well, not all of them. Copenhagen and Aarhus is doing quite fine, but most of the rest of the municipalities are not doing great, to be honest. A lot of them have to do severe savings in terms of education, welfare. So a lot of schools will be axed, a lot of bus routes will be closed. But at the same time, the state is doing quite well. So it's the price of autonomy, you can say. The local governments have a lot of say. But in the same time, it also comes with this risk that if things go bad, I mean, it's your own responsibility to fix it. You don't wait for the state to come and intervene. Only if things go really bad, like, defaulting or going into... But and the state will only intervene after you have sold all your assets and whatnot. So it's extreme situation that the state will have to take control of a local government. You don't want to get there as a citizen and as a part of local government. But anyway, we dwelt way too long on this one. And the very last one I want to say is basically the expansion of BRICS. I know that BRICS is not something common for us as Europeans, but it's part of this world we live in now. There seems to be a lot of countries that kind of are a bit angry on us as Westerners, and they decided to create their own little club where Europeans and Americans and Canadians and Australians and whatnot, they are not welcomed.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, they decide to have their own club where US dollar is not the thing, and they represent now half of the world population, 30% of the world economy. So we need to keep an eye on them because they seem to be playing with Russia. And in case of a global conflict, we will not be on the same side, most likely. So that's interesting to follow how that develops and how their cooperation goes together. Obviously, we are still trying to convince a lot of those countries to come back to on the Western side. There's a lot of money and a lot of efforts being done. Even Mette Frederiksen was in Africa, touring Africa, trying to convince a lot of those countries to not follow the Russian propaganda and influence in a way. So it's a war. It's a war for influence in the world right now, because basically you can say that the stage is being set. I don't want to say more because this is it's a news commentary, but at some point we'll have to discuss this as well in another episode.
So listen out for that. Moving on, what's our main focus today?
Well, main focus, I was thinking to look a little bit at climate, because there's a big change announced, actually. I'm not sure how often do you go out in nature and walk through the forests and whatnot. But the government announced that 75,000 hectares of forest will change the way you're used that it looks. And remember, the state only has 200,000 hectares, so basically we're talking about half of what the state owns in terms of forest. So literally there's no way you'll not see these untouched forests around you, but we'll talk about it more a bit later. We have climate tax on clothing. The social liberals have proposed this, and it's interesting to look at it. Then there's free public transport in Aarhus today. Today is in Sunday, 27th of August, so it's interesting experiment as well. We're going to talk about the reduced consumption of electricity and gas, because it's autumn. We know what there was last autumn. So I think electricity and gas is back on people's minds once the cold comes back. And then obviously it's a news from Norway, but it's interesting, right? We haven't heard about this in a while, but Norway, as a very rich country, they are establishing emergency grain storage. Why? That will be interesting to look at.
Well, today we won't have time to cover all of these headlines in depth, but do remember it's all in the newsletter, so do subscribe if you haven't already and enjoy the full stories direct to your inbox every Sunday. You can click the link in the show description to subscribe today and keep up to date with what's happening in Denmark. Now, before we move into the deeper dive segment of the show and take an intricate look at some of those headlines you've just heard, Narcissus, would you like to take us through our political overview?
It's interesting to look at the latest opinion poll. In general, opinion polls, they're being used to see how the government is doing, how the other parties are doing. It doesn't necessarily reflect how the elections will go, if we will have elections, but it gives an idea of are people supporting in the direction that the government has had so far? If you as a party are launching a new proposal, was that welcomed by the voters or not? So it's quite an important tool, actually, for people working in politics, these opinion polls, and for us as citizens as well to look what's coming, right? The government, as you expect, it's not doing as well as they did during the elections. In general, all governments suffer between elections because people get angry for one reason or another, and there have been many reasons to get angry, and even though there also have been many reasons to be happy with this current government, it's difficult for them to stay on plus. So obviously, if there was elections tomorrow, they wouldn't get a majority. So yeah, that's how it is. And of course, that means that opposition parties are doing quite well. And in general, it's safer for a party to stay in opposition because all the people who get angry, they find they're looking for a new home, and they usually look to the opposition. And opposition always has the privilege to not do anything. They just can criticize, they can talk, propose things, because they can even go a bit crazier with their proposals because they know they don't have a majority, so they don't actually have to implement it. So
they can make big promises that they'd never be able to implement anyway and not have to implement them, and thereby gain lots of voters because they make these promises of these large changes that don't happen when they actually come to power.
Well, to be honest, it's more of, in a way, yes, but in a also no, because it's a political tactic. They go to over-promising because it's remember, Denmark, it's a politics of compromise. So that means you'll never get what you promise anyway, and you'll never get what you want either. So it's always good to overplay your hand so that you can start your negotiating spot from a bit higher. So let's say I want to introduce a 200 kronas air flying tax, right? And that can be, wow, way. But the idea is, okay, maybe not 200. And then when you negotiate with other parties, okay, in the end, let's at least have a flying tax, whatever the amount is, maybe 50 kronas, right? And that will allow more parties to be in, because you got them used to the idea of having a flying tax. You scared them with this 200 kronas big amount. But in the end, you still got your flying tax. It's a tactic. So I wouldn't blame them for doing it. It's the privilege of being in the opposition. You lost the elections, you had to suffer because of it, you don't have power. Well, then now it's your chance to actually try to influence the ones who are actually in power, because you can go and try to negotiate new ideas and new laws. And that's what I like about Danish politics. It's a bit different from what we have experienced in other countries. So just to say quickly, the Social Democrats obviously are losing out to the Socialists. A lot of people are moving to the SF. The Liberals are losing out to the Libertarians, which are in the Liberal Alliance, which is in the opposition. So obviously right now we have this, but in the same time, it's still not possible to have an alternative to the current government. Like the Reds, neither the Blues, neither the far right, none of them can muster a majority regardless. So right now I think we live in this new reality where red and blue parties have to work together over the center to create governments. We just simply, none of the other sides can do it. The world is too fragmented. The blue side always had been plagued by the far right parties, which they don't want to work with anymore. So that's why they themselves are in this position where they have to work with the center parties from the red side anyway. So that's how the new reality looks like, and that's the political overview for this week.
If you do want to hear more about the political side and things that we've just been discussing, do check out last week's episode from the 20th of August, because we go quite deep into politics there. So do check that out if you haven't already. Next up, we've just about got enough time to cover one topic in our deep dive segment, where we discuss the big stories of the week. Narcissus, which topic would you like to deep dive into today?
It's so difficult, right? The big story of the week, but I mean, let's look at the free public transport in Aarhus. It might not be the story of the week in Denmark, but it's an interesting thing to look at, because we have seen probably countries like Estonia or other countries in Europe who already have experimented with free public transport. But the reason in Aarhus is quite interesting is because they want to try to do car-free Sundays. So basically they want on Sundays to basically close down all the streets and turn those streets into community events to bring the people back together. So it's in a way they try to combine, reducing CO2 emissions, but in the same time trying to rebuild the community aspect of the cities. Because the large cities, I think they are suffering from that perspective. The community, because Denmark used to be a country of many small communities together, right? Now these bigger cities kind of attracted thousands and thousands. They kind of killed a lot of these small communities, but they didn't recreate them in the new places. I mean, it's quite common in cities like Copenhagen, Aarhus, Aalborg, that you don't speak to your neighbors, right? You never even say hi, or you have no idea who else lives on your street and whatnot. Especially in the blocks area. So, I mean, do you know your neighbors, for example? Do you speak to them?
I know some of my neighbours, yeah, and I always smile at everybody. They don't all smile back, which always upsets me. You know, when you smile at a stranger in the street and they just look at you like you're completely off your head. And I get very upset by that, but I'm never going to stop smiling because I think having a smile from a stranger is like a gift and it just makes you feel better. But yeah, it's actually my birthday today.
Today, wow.
Happy
birthday.
Yes, 27th of August is my birthday. Yeah, I've got a few of our neighbours. I probably know about 7 of the apartments in my block, or in the area of blocks. I'm quite nosy and I'm quite chatty and I'm quite smiley, so I do tend to get to know people around me quite. I enjoy getting to know people around me. And it's nice to know who's about, you know. And we have a policy in our building where if you have a party, you kind of put a note up to say I'm having a party at this flat. Drop in for a drink.
Wow.
So that's nice. And in my where I live, there's been an email sent out. They're trying to get a community together to discuss things that matter to us and, you know, things like that as a community. So there is quite a push where I live for a community type feel. I mean, I've actually just moved apartments, but within the same block because I love it here so much. I've just moved into a slightly bigger apartment. I've been here over a year and yeah, it's taken me that long to know sort of 7 different apartments. So it happens, but it happens gradually. But I think that's really good and it's interesting. I think a similar thing was happening in the UK for sure, because so many shops closed down in the UK on the high streets. Nobody was going to the high streets anymore. And now it's all coffee shops. And when I was in the UK, I was sort of campaigning to turn these derelicts, not derelict, but these empty shopping malls and empty buildings into community centres where you could go and do arts and crafts and music venues. And I was sort of campaigning for that. And then I sort of gave up on the UK and moved to Denmark where I'm much happier. But hopefully someone's still flying the community space flag in England.
Of course.
I'm sure there are people.
There's lots of civic activists everywhere. No, but I think, first of all, we are happy that you chose Denmark. I think every new person that comes to Denmark and brings their own experience and personality and this drive to do something benefits us all. But in the sense of community, I think trying to combine climate change with solving other societal problems like loneliness, for example, which is one of our biggest plague in Denmark, unfortunately. We are in this situation where we are so well off economically that people can actually live alone, but unfortunately we kind of exaggerate with that. There are just so many apartments and homes in Denmark where only one person lives. And I find that to be sad. I think we as humans are meant to live in packs. We are pack animals, after all, social people, social animals. And we do better when there's more people around us. This living alone thing, it's not ideal. So turning the streets into meeting points, imagine if there is one really cool experiment. This summer I was in Poland, and out of nowhere, we were in the hotel room, there was this alarm ringing. We got scared, of course. What was that? Is a fire alarm? What the hell is that? We are close to the border of Ukraine. You have all sorts of imaginations back there. Everyone, took what they could and they all went outside, and then people started talking to each other, people who didn't know, and it felt different, it felt so surreal in a way, right? To have, it was not a serious situation. It seems it was just someone who overshowered and it was too much steam and it kind of triggered all the alarm for fire. But what happened afterwards is that the people that will have never talked to each other exchanged, they talked to each other, they exchanged words and whatnot. And the second day in the morning in the breakfast, you could see a different vibe. People would say hi to each other. That's like, okay, that's a community. It was a moment of crisis. It brought people together. It created a community. We shouldn't rely on moments of crisis to to create communities. But what I'm saying is we need to give people reasons to get out of their apartments and be in front of their buildings, all of them, and see who is there. You'll be surprised who is around you, who's living in the same area. And that's why I really like this idea of closing down streets for cars and turning them into communities. But at the same time, we kind of go in that direction, right? There is a trend for large cities that slowly, they want to make them car-free, right? And that's why they try to combine somehow free public transport with car-free. So get people more to use public transport. In the same time, get them to not use their own cars. But at the same time, I don't know how they're gonna afford this. I mean, I know Copenhagen and Aarhus have the money to kind of run on, let's just say, a couple of days per year where there is free public transport. But I cannot imagine my municipality where we have to close down bus routes because we simply are on minus in terms of transport budget. How could we ever afford free public transport day, even one day? It's just so expensive to run all those. The gasoline is expensive. Drivers are expensive, maintenance and whatnot. So it's not cheap to run a whole day. So I know a lot of activists they're asking we should have definitely free public transport, but you should also wonder, okay, but who's paying for it? Where do we get the money for it?
Yeah, everything has to be paid for. And on that note, if you are listening to this today, Sunday the 27th of August, do take advantage of that free transport in Aarhus if you're heading to Aarhus or if you fancy going to Aarhus, and check it out and let us know if it was a good initiative. Before we sign off, I'd just like to remind you that we are now inviting guest speakers onto this podcast to share further insights into the news of the week. If you would like to apply to be a guest on the Last Week in Denmark podcast with Narcissus and myself, Wizzy, please email your name and topic of expertise and a summary of your experience on your chosen topic to hello@wizmedia.dk, and that's spelled WIZMEDIA, and it's .dk. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you, Narcissus. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today.
Absolutely, was lovely as always, and I'm looking forward to our next episode, because remember, now we are actually doing this every week.
Yeah, don't make promises you can't keep, but we'll try. We hope you found this podcast informative, interesting, and of value. We'll be back next week on your favourite podcast platform. Just search Last Week in Denmark. Take care.